Hello, and welcome back to another strange, confused video on Martin Heidegger's Being and Time. I'm going to continue on the same chapter that I talked about in the last video on Dasein as care, but I'm going to talk about the parts that I left out last time. And they are actually the most interesting part of this chapter, in my opinion, and would definitely deserve to be in a separate chapter altogether. But for some reason he linked it together with the concept of care, which still doesn't really. I feel like there's definitely something I'm missing with that concept. But what this video is going to be about is maybe three things, three quite big things in the field of philosophy: the question of truth, reality, and being. Or the question of the indifference or beings independent from ourselves, whether they exist, how they exist, and if we can access them, and that sort of thing. So this system that he has built up till now he's finally, or in a very big way, is linking his current system to these more traditional questions of philosophy, seeing that with how he has explained this concept of Dasein and these different ways of being, how that is going to relate to these old questions of truth and reality that might be more familiar to people. And it's going to be a bit tricky just reading from Being in Time what he actually believes, or what he's trying to say in terms of the being of the external world independent from ourselves. But it was actually really helpful to go through the external sources that I've been using, namely the Hubert Dreyfus video lecture series and the introduction to Heidegger's Being in Time by Magda King. And with those, I think I reached some clarity on this important chapter. So I'll try to share that with you in this video. Just to start off, I have one quote I wanted to read from Being in Time, just to ease you into this idea of the independence of external beings from Dasein. Beings are, independently of the experience, cognition, and the comprehension through which they are disclosed, discovered, and determined. But being is only in the understanding of that being to whose being something like an understanding of being belongs. So there you sort of have it, given straightforwardly, that Heidegger does believe that there are beings, or beings are independently of us. But what does it mean that they are independent of us? In this funny way that Heidegger likes to express himself with quotations or italic styles on this, on are and is. And it's going to mean something like it's only possible for beings to manifest as beings as long as there is Dasein. If you want to put it in terms that Heidegger himself might not have used, but is more understandable, it's that a thing will only be manifest as a thing as long as someone is there to observe the thing. And you think to yourself, does the thing exist independently of the observer? And it's like, yeah, it does, but the thing that we associate with, and I can't even use the word thing carelessly here, I realize. Something for us to be kind of means that it is manifest for us. That what we mean by a tree being is sort of synonymous with the experience of observing a tree in some way. That the being manifesting to us, and that action of manifesting to us, that itself is sort of the being, or that is what we think of by the being. And that experience is clearly dependent on an observer. And it doesn't make sense to Heidegger to say that the thing is without the observer. But it's not that there isn't something there without Dasein. And already here, the language breaks down so that we can't really use is in these two ways. We would actually need a new language here. And it's kind of surprising that Heidegger didn't try to invent some word of his own here. Instead of using these is and are, why not use a new word for that as well? Would make things a little bit less confusing. But at least one way that he distinguishes reality as it manifests to us and reality as it is independent from ourselves is how he links this view to the world, to the notions of reality and the real. Because Heidegger believes that reality is dependent on us, or that is how he writes it. But the real is not. Which, if you don't know the way in which Heidegger twists language in his own way, it sounds very contradicted. But basically, Heidegger says that the world, you could say, or yeah, let's say use the word world for now. That the world initially, and for the most part, as Heidegger would put it, manifests as reality to us. And reality means, for the most part, the presence of objective things. It means the things being in their present at hand mode of being, sort of in this more isolated and essentialized way of being that we traditionally associate with being itself, with all types of being. And it is only this specific type of, or when we view the world as only this type of beings, that is when the world takes on this character of reality. So yeah, reality means viewing the world as only there is this other word for objective beings that escapes me right now. But it says that the thing that is sort of the sort of stuff out there that makes it possible for something to manifest to us, that is called the real. So there is something there, independent from us, but does not in itself sort of manifest in itself as reality. And all of this talk of reality and truth and beings independent of ourselves brings us to the question of the proof or the truth, just the problem of the external world, that how can we know that there is something external to us at all? How can we be sure that we are not just sort of isolated isolated subjects that just are not really grappling with anything outside of our own being. And Heidegger goes over this question, how it has been approached traditionally, especially by Immanuel Kant. And I guess for Heidegger, he sort of circumvents this problem of proving the external world in that he doesn't think that there even needs to be a proof of the external world. And the reason he believes this is because that he has already showed, although you will, it depends on if you are convinced of what he has been trying to say so far, that when he says that Dasein is, or Dasein's being is being in the world, that our being is inextricably linked to engagement with something external, to some like this dynamic relation between ourselves and the world. That is us. We cannot be without the world. So proving the world is it's almost nonsensical to Heidegger, because there is no worldless subject. We are always engaged with the world, and that is part of our being. And I will say that I'm not super convinced by this argument, or at least there is. I'm wondering if it truly refutes the idea that Dasein could have invented its own world through its own, like the potential to invent the world lies within Dasein itself in some way. And also, I don't know, he doesn't really go over, I think he sort of dodges the question whether this external world that we are engaged with is also true. I don't think he manages to bring those two questions together, about truth and the existence of the external world. But I will also say that I don't think it's much of a problem. It's a problem philosophically, is in that, well, how can we prove the external world? That's a very difficult thing to do. But is that problem something that should bother me? That what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I believe, what I experience, if that is connected to something real, or if it's all in my head, so to speak. And personally, I don't think it's a very pressing problem at all. I don't have this sense that, of like paranoia, or like, how can I trust what I experience? Because I never really believed that type of absolute access to or access to absolute truth with a big T is even possible. So there was never any hope of of getting to that. But there's always, but I would say I belong more to the school of thought that see truth as this incremental process, that we can have very good reason to believe certain things, but never actual, definite, undisputable final proofs of anything. There's only more information that implies certain things, and we get more and better information and update our worldview, and they always need to be ready to do that if new information is presented to us, and realize that we never get to that sort of final point, but we can get to somewhere that is good enough for living. And he says he tries to say sort of the same thing again in another quote a bit later in the chapter that I thought I would read as well. The fact that reality is ontologically grounded in the being of Dasein cannot mean that something real can only be what it is in itself when and as long as Dasein exists. However, only as Dasein is, that is, as long as there is the ontic possibility of an understanding of being, is there being. If Dasein does not exist, then there is no independence either, nor is there an in itself. Such matters are then neither comprehensible nor incomprehensible. If Dasein does not exist, then innerworldly beings too can neither be discovered nor can they lie in concealment. Then it can neither be said that beings are, nor that they are not. It can now indeed be said that as long as there is an understanding of being, and thus an understanding of objective presence, that then beings will still continue to be. So in that passage, it sounded a little bit more like, things don't actually exist without us. But clearly Heidegger believes that they do. It's just a question of how it is that they do, in the way that they exist without us. And I will actually go back to an idea that I had just at the beginning of this video series, that at least for me seems to solve this question a little bit more clearly. That the way that I viewed things going into Being in Time, and that I haven't really changed my mind so far, is that what we bring to the table in terms of our perception of the world, now speaking from my own position here, not from Heidegger, is that we also bring this this division of reality in the more common sense of the word. We bring the separation of reality into entities. That is something that comes along with us, and so it doesn't make sense to speak of things in themselves independent from our perceptions, because to be a thing, to determine something as a thing, is itself an act of an observer. But without an observer, you would only have this in some form of some system, or as a totality, or a whole, or a field, or something of that order. And if Heidegger would introduce this type of thinking in his work, also, if we would have done that, then I think this would make more sense when you're trying to speak of reality independent from Dasein. So with this, he wants to also bring attention to the concept of truth, which I haven't spoken about yet, really. And he wants to talk about, because the reason that he brings it up now is that what is this relation between, let's say, us and the world, or Dasein and beings. This relation between us, that is sort of where truth comes in. So that's why he's brings it up now. And he's asking about what is the being of truth? What is the, I guess, the character of truth? And how has that been understood in the tradition historically, and how does he and how does he want us to understand it? And like with a lot of parts of Being in Time, he brings it back to a discussion of the Greeks, how they would think or view the world. And it's a bit unfortunate again that he, or at least in the version that I'm using, there are all these Greek words that they are written out in Greek without a translation or an attempt to explain what all the words mean. So it's a bit frustrating to know what he's talking about. Fortunately, I do know at least one of the words that he's referring to, partly due to this introduction by Magda King. That is the old Greek notion of truth as aletheia, the oldest idea of what truth means to the Greeks. And aletheia, as I understand it, is the idea that of truth as uncovering, as bringing out of hiddenness. I don't know if it's associated with the experience of seeing something for the first time in this sort of, okay, now I see this sort of, now it's become clear to me. And that experience is what sort of becomes defining of what truth means, to bring out of concealment. And Heidegger is going to say that this type of truth, or truth in this manner, is the more primordial truth compared to what we think traditionally. And when he says primordial, not only here but in all of Being in Time, he uses the word to mean the preconditions of something else. So the primordial truth is the precondition of truth, and specifically, or to be more exact, the aletheia is the precondition to everyday truth as we think of truth. And what do we mean by everyday truth? If you haven't thought about this yourself, it might seem like, or it might not be self-evident, but basically this everyday notion of truth is what can be called correspondence theory. That truth is the correspondence with some what do you say? Well, let's say the idea of an object and the true object, and how well your idea corresponds to the actual true object, that is determined of how true the statement is. And if you're only reading Being in Time, you would easily get the impression that Heidegger doesn't think that this notion of truth is, or idea of truth is true or correct. But listening to Dreyfus, I realized through him that he doesn't have a problem with this idea of truth as correspondence. It's only that this traditional idea of truth is grounded in something deeper that is, that is the foundation, and that we need to recognize to sort of see or to realize that this foundation is actually linked in our being, this uncovering that takes place in aletheia. Because Dasein is essentially uncovering. shedding light upon the world. So we are truth, or we are always in a truth in this primordial sense, he wants to say. But it's then it becomes also a question of, well, if truth is sort of linked to Dasein, definitely this uncovering, because we are the ones who uncover. But this uncovering, this aletheia, is what makes normal truth possible. Then you get into the question of, okay, what is the independence of truth from Dasein? And Heidegger is going to say that, well, truth is actually dependent on Dasein. And he puts it like this. Constituted by disclosedness, Dasein is essentially in the truth. Disclosedness is an essential kind of being of Dasein. There is truth only insofar as Dasein is, and as long as it is. Beings are discovered only when Dasein is, and as long as Dasein is, are they disclosed. So starting from that, it sounds very much like truth is completely man-dependent, or dependent on Dasein. But it actually says pretty much straight away after that passage, he talks about the truth of the laws of motion that Newton had discovered, and said that they were indeed not true until Newton had discovered them, for Heidegger. But that doesn't mean that they were untrue before, and that the beings that they point out did exist in some way before Newton's laws. And it's more the case that it doesn't make sense to speak of truth outside of Dasein. So it's a bit tricky, again, with this to tell to evaluate this statement, or this view that truth comes into being only with an observer, and that the thing wasn't true until someone had observed it. Because it's just that since he's changing the meaning of the words, it becomes difficult to comment on his text or his writing with the same words, with the traditional meaning in mind. And it's not actually clear when he talks about Newton that this, if he's really talking about this primordial truth, which would make sense, but he would need to clarify that and say that they were in fact true in the traditional sense. But I guess he wouldn't. But the fact that he doesn't do that makes me believe that he says that no, you cannot say in either way that things were true before Dasein. And he definitely says so when he's talking about eternal truths more generally. And he says that there are no eternal truths unless there is an eternal Dasein. Which, of course, the only way you would have an eternal Dasein is if you would have something like God, and if Heidegger would be willing to attribute God's being something similar to Dasein. And Heidegger is actually from a religious background, from I believe, and I'm not sure if it's from a Catholic background. I think it is, but I'm not 100% sure. But by the time that he's writing Being in Time, I believe he has left that behind him. So now he's not writing from a religious point of view, or with a religious belief forming these views. And so there are no eternal truths, but when they appear, at least are they sort of stable to all of Daseins. And Heidegger says that outright that no truth is pretty much, or he says that truth is relative. But it is not relative in a sort of weak sense, in a shallow sense. Because it's relative in a way that you couldn't do anything about yourself. It's not that your truth is influenced by your upbringing and your misinformed opinions or informed opinions, but lack of knowledge on some other area, things that you could correct in hindsight, things that you could update and change and identify and consciously work towards fixing, let's say. But it is relative in a much, in our being, that truth manifests, the way truth manifests to you, or the way that the world the closest is disclosing to you, that is what allows you to even perceive the that structures everything about who you are as a being, and the way that you can view yourself and your possibilities, and it's so fundamental that we couldn't change them ourselves. So it is a kind of relativism, but not this sort of, it's too shallow to say that it's all subjective. I guess is if I wanted to defend Heidegger, and there is no in this stage no analysis of power or anything like that that's coming into play. And there is also one more problem that both Dreyfus and I believe Magda King does also bring up, that since he has defined Dasein as in a way where Dasein is sort of truth, Dasein is the disclosing of the world. But then he also says that we are all also in untruth. And if you would have this more shallow relativist view of truth and untruth, it would be understandable why you could hold something to be, you could have false views because you're simply sort of misinformed, or you've been biased because of your upbringing or your environment in some way. But if our being is essentially in untruth, that's sort of it's sort of easy to accept, or much easier to accept the idea that we should be directly in truth, to be in this uncovering of the world. But the fact that we are also in the concealment of the world, it's like, wait, why would we be that as well? And it's a bit tricky. Like, how does Heidegger explain untruth? Really, how does it come about? And I think the best way or the most satisfying way that I've come across to explain this phenomenon is where Magda King brings up she says that the world is revealed as hidden. That's the only place where I think this can make sense, that the world is, we see or we sort of realize what it is that we don't understand, and that is how we can be in untruth. And again, truth as in uncoveredness, and so untruth would be coveredness. We come to realize that something is covered over in the world. Yeah, that's the only way that's sort of it makes sense that we are simultaneously in truth and untruth at the same time. And one last thing I want to say about what he writes about truth is that he mentions somewhere that the idea that as he says, the locus of truth is the proposition. So that the content of truth lies within the language structure. That language describes something, that is the description that is we can judge whether it's true or false. And he says that language is actually something that has the same type of being as a tool. And I just wanted to bring that up just because language doesn't get enough attention in Being in Time so far, I would say. And even here, I would still think that maybe language would deserve some modified version of being, not just another tool, because it's like so fundamental that it's probably not fair to say that the being of a word is the same type of being of a hammer. There's probably more to dig at that Heidegger just doesn't have the time or hasn't thought of enough, I think. But I thought it would just be interesting just to share that that words are tools, and I very much share that view, I would say, in the sense that tools or that words are ways that we use to try and replicate what it is that we are experiencing or having in mind with the person next, or the person that we're communicating with. And sometimes I hear this. You often get this question of, what does this word mean to you? Or what do you think this? Or I guess when people ask that, I get the sense that they have a view in mind that words are more like these present at hand mode of being, that there are sort of these essential parts of a word that we're trying to get to, while I more think that words are the question isn't what do you think this word, what does this word mean to you, but what do you mean by this word when you use it in a certain way. When I say because words can mean very different things in very different contexts, and depending on who uses them, I will sort of infer different type of information. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to quickly bring that up. I think it's interesting that he shares this view that words, well, yeah, they are tools. They are not essentialized beings. Of course, I realized that there is sort of a problem with this theory, that probably has to be some sort of bedrock of essentialized meanings to words. Otherwise, communication breaks down entirely, and that might be sort of common cultural fabrics that are needed for the fundamental need for communication. But yeah, let's not go into this any further. I just wanted to bring it up as a last point. That truth is the locus of truth is the proposition. Does Heidegger agree with that? I'm not completely sure. It feels like he should say something more on the topic. And I mean, there's always, I mean, he should understand that there's always more being said than what is being said. That we're always communicating more information than just sort of purely the words that we're speaking. No, yeah, his analysis on language is lacking in Being in Time. But yeah, this is actually going to be the last chapter of division 1 of the book, which is the one that he, as I understand it, the one that he spent the most time on, maybe several years, and he submitted that as its own book initially, and it was only afterwards, after some critique from the university faculty, that he added division 2, and so that has, as I've heard from Dreyfus, it's not as well thought through, not as perhaps consistent as the first part. But yeah, I don't. We'll see if I'll be able to tell the difference. But yeah, that is going to be next video. And yeah, thanks for watching.